Order, call the roll.
Trustee Fenton.
Here.
Trustee Dodge.
Here.
Trustee Calandrello.
Here.
Trustee Healy.
Here.
Trustee Katsinas.
Here.
Trustee Malani.
Here.
Mayor Pica.
Here.
Please rise for the pledge.
Pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
FY 2021 budget hearing overview of the proposed budget.
George, would you like to
Sure.
start?
So this is our second budget workshop. Today's focus is going to be on debt and departmental highlights. So we'll start it off with debt. As the board is aware, the board approved a contract for a new financial advisor. So I want to introduce our financial advisors, Bob Lewis and Andrew Kim. They're with PMA Securities. So they're going to help us with the debt portion of today's agenda. So Bob, if you want to take it away.
Sure.
Mind if I remove this?
Yeah.
Otherwise my glasses are going to steam up.
Right.
Thank you for having us here tonight. We're very pleased to begin working with the Village of Orland Park during this time in which you go through these plans related to your debt. So before we dig into the presentation, we just want to give you what the objectives were. You know, these are the objectives that guided the plan of finance that we constructed to present tonight. One, we need to convert the lines of credit to a long-term financing. The lines of credit were only meant to provide interim financing for the capital projects that you undertake. The other thing another item that we had, objective that we had in mind was to take advantage of historically low interest rates. And my colleague Andrew Kim here in a moment will go over a couple slides on where interest rates are from a historical perspective and give you a little bit of color on what we experienced earlier this year. Adopt a long-term comprehensive debt strategy as part of the plan, in which we'll have more to come on what does that exactly mean here when we get into the body of the presentation. And then beginning in 2021, we want to consolidate the debt payments into three funds. We want to have the debt service fund for obligations payable from the governmental funds only. Water, sewer, and stormwater funds will pay for obligations that relate to that system only from the enterprise fund. And then the Triangle TIF fund will pay for the remaining payments to be made for a refinance bullet on one of the outstanding bonds and the 2013 C bonds. This will provide for greater transparency in how these bonds are to be paid going forward. As part of the process, we also had to go through and identify the long-term uses for the home rule sales tax fund, because that you've used over the years for capital projects, support of the park services, debt service, and some other miscellaneous items. So we wanted to make sure that as we looked at the home rule sales tax as a source of funding for debt service, that we weren't taking away from another priority in putting together the plan of finance. So with those objectives in mind, we're just going to go over the market here. And Andrew's going to cover these two slides, and then I think there's one slide to be covered by Kevin, and then I'll do the body of the presentation.
Good evening. Thanks again for having us here. We certainly do look forward to working with the village. Just want to briefly go over a market update for you all. As you can see here, we have interest rates in the municipal bond market. These are determined by the Municipal Market Data Index, which is the index upon which all municipal bonds are priced. And what we're showing here are the gray backdrop, which is what the Federal Reserve is doing with the federal funds rate, which impacts only short-term rates. And then you have four terms here: the 5, the 10. I'm sorry, the 1, the 5, the 10, and the 20 year. And the main point from showing this is to see, obviously, we are on the far right-hand side of the graph right now. And so relative to history, going back to 2003, clearly we are in a very low interest rate environment. This graph here is a shorter time frame. It only goes back to January of this year. And you can see here the volatility that occurred from COVID, the pandemic in March. And since then, you've seen interest rates have not only come down, but they've really stabilized over the last several months. And so it is really an opportune time for the village to be entering the market. Not only are rates stable, they are very low, and locking in long-term interest rates in an environment like this is certainly a very strategic and thoughtful approach to your debt management. Having said that, I will now pass it back to Bob. I'm sorry, Kevin. George.
Kevin's going to talk on this slide.
Yeah, so this is an illustration of the village's year-ending, historical year-ending outstanding debt. So as you can see, starting in about 2007, 2008, there were some bonds that were taken out related to Main Street Triangle TIF, and the larger spikes in 2013, from 2013 to about 2016, that all relates to the 9750 project when additional bonds were taken out. So, and when that liquidation event happened, then some of those bonds, some of that debt was then paid off, and some was put into the lockbox and has been saved for future debt service payments on that project. But this is a historical, overall historical debt that the village has held, and it's remained right around $80 million apart from the TIF, that particular TIF debt, for the past several years.
So that was an overview of the history of the village's bonded and other indebtedness. This gives you a graphical representation of the current indebtedness. So this is debt service, the annual payments of principal and interest. Now I do want to point out here that the blue columns in 21 and 22, we've capped off the y-axis at $6 million because those 2 years went up to $17.7 million, so it would really skewed the presentation if we had those go up to their full amount. So we want to make sure everybody's aware of that. Also, on the far right side, you'll see that debt ends in 28, or at least the presentation of it does. Your water and stormwater and sewer debt go out several more years beyond that. But again, for presentation purposes, we just wanted to focus on this smaller time frame. And that water and sewer debt portrayed there includes the anticipated payments that you will have associated with the regional water system. So those are included in there, just so you're aware of that. So not all that has been issued yet, but it's based off the schedule that they provided to the village. So currently, this is organized by your source of payment. You have bonds paid from the property tax directly. You have bonds they're actually term loans paid for the capital projects fund. That's the yellow. That's one of the things we want to get out of there. Capital projects fund should just be used to pay for the capital projects as they're incurred. Should not be recording the payments of debt service in there. So we're going to pull that out as well, put that into the debt service fund. And then the blue lines is sort of a mixture of the TIF bonds, some of which are paid from the tax increment, some are paid from home rule sales tax, and then some are paid from the dollars that you have on hand from the payment that was received from the developer. And those payments will be segregated and returned and put back into the TIF fund. Again, just to provide more transparency on what funds are being used to pay for what.
Mayor Pico.
Trustee Dodge.
So more transparency. It's fully transparent now. This seems to be a stylized way to do accounting.
Well, it's because right now you have bonds in the debt service fund that are paying TIF bonds, and they're also paying government-related activity bonds. So we just make it clear that, okay, those bonds payable from government activity funds are the only ones paid from the debt service fund.
It's a way of doing things. It's not necessarily more transparent.
Well, maybe it's easier to discern then where the types of bonds are being paid from which fund.
It's a way of doing things.
It's a way of doing things that, from my perspective, and probably from our accountant's perspective, is more transparent. So,
No,
go ahead.
I disagree.
So the debt service spikes in FY21 and 22. You have two bond series, the 12B and the 13A bonds that have bullet maturities. Each series has two bullet maturities, due in 21 and 22. Those bullets total approximately $16 million in each of those 2 years. Those bonds were both issued to finance projects related to the Triangle TIF, and you had an agreement with the developer that was structured in the event that you received some upfront payments from the developer that could be used to pay down these bullets. And in 2017, as you're probably aware, you received about a little over $50 million towards the repayment of these bullets. You used $21 million of that to pay down a bank loan immediately. That's what you saw earlier, right here in the graph where Kevin was pointing out. That you use those, and that's why it had that big drop right there. You plan to use the remaining portion of those developer proceeds to pay off all the bullets due in FY21 and approximately 50% of the bullets due in 22. There's not enough to pay off all the bullets. So a little bit later in the presentation, we'll talk through how the plan is set up to pay for that remaining bullet. So the village, a little bit more history here. The village has used lines of credit through BMO Bank as interim financing to pay for the capital projects. This includes financing that you did related to the Main Street TIF. This practice has been beneficial. It reduces your negative carry, but it does contain some market risk. What it means there is because you're borrowing on a short-term basis, it doesn't, and you're only borrowing it when you need those funds, you don't have as much negative carry of paying interest rate on the bonds before you spend those proceeds. Now, the risk that you always have using this type of strategy is interest rate risk. What if rates rise before you do long-term financing? So it's played out really well for you because rates have come down to the point that we are today. And the rate that you pay on these is a spread to LIBOR plus, or a percentage of LIBOR plus a spread to that. And you also pay a fee based on the unused portion of the line of credit. Currently outstanding as of November 23rd, you have $8 million outstanding. You plan to do some more draws on these lines of credit before the long-term financings occur. And they are callable at any time, so there's no penalty to prepay them. And then the practice that you've done here recently is to roll these lines of credit into term loans with BMO. These term loans have been for periods of time of 7 to 8 years, and they have a level payment. And the advantage of that, it does create a relatively low interest cost because you're paying it back over a shorter period of time, but it does burden the revenue sources dedicated to repayment because you're trying to pay them off over such a short period of time. The term loans can be paid off early for some reason if it was deemed that you needed to do that, but there is a make-whole payment that would be owed, which essentially makes the bank whole for you paying it off early for any changes in market movement. So it essentially renders it non-callable because of that payment you would have to make. So bond funding for capital, so this kind of gets us now where we are today. So bonding in today's market, it secures capital funds at known interest rates, eliminating the interest rate risk I was talking about earlier. Because with the short-term borrowing, that works good for minimizing that negative carry, but it does carry the risk that rates would rise before you do the long-term financing. The additional benefit of bond funding is the village can lock in long-term rates for a longer period of time, meaning because you're spreading the payments out over more years in this current interest rate environment, that takes the pressure off your payment sources, and it lets you invest in additional projects now versus waiting until the term loans are paid off and then doing another series of projects. Construction costs, is you're probably well aware, over the years of doing construction projects, over time the cost of construction generally goes up, and usually construction costs increase faster than the rate of inflation. And the bond funding provides a clear and transparent long-term repayment plan. So this slide, I think, Kevin, you're going to talk about again?
So as part of the 2020 budget, several projects were contemplated to use line of credit borrowing to fund them. And so this is kind of a snapshot of where each of those particular projects were at relative to what was anticipated to be used to fund those projects. Some of them, including the telecommunications system and the Centennial Park Master Plan, are still in the planning or RFP stage. Others, like the Humphrey Complex improvements and water main replacement and flood study improvements, have been completed. Of course, the larger projects, specifically road improvements and the water main, those are much larger, and payments are still ongoing with those particular projects.
Mayor Pico?
Trustee Dodge.
What are the other additional roads?
Those were some of the rollover roads. They weren't detailed in what I looked at, but what was originally anticipated in the budget was $7.3 million. And then when there were rollover projects, those were anticipated to use the line of credit proceeds as well.
State roads, or it is our roads?
I believe that those were state roads.
Okay. Thank you.
So here's a summary of what would be financed. You entered 2020 with $3.6 million of lines of credit outstanding. Your total expected draws in 2020 are $14.1 million. So total lines of credit expected at the beginning of next year, it's just under $18 million that you'll owe. 2021, what is budgeted for capital, includes $3.8 million for IT, $6 million for roads, $2.75 million for Tinley Creek, water and sewer projects for $4.3 million. Those are related just to the village, not related to the regional water system. So that total $16 million. So for total between the lines of credit that you will have incurred and the additional capital projects for 2021 to come up to $34.6 million. And what are the revenue sources identified for paying the bonds? Now, these revenue sources are identifying you're already using to service the debt service, not all in the general debt fund or in your debt service fund. Some of this is, again, in your capital projects fund. And the plan would be to have all that revenue identified in the debt service fund. So $1.2 million of home rule sales tax, $1.6 million of direct property taxes for bonds that you levy and just collect the tax for. $1.1 million from the general fund that's currently used to pay a portion of the debt service that's in the capital projects fund. So a total of $3.9 million has been identified for payments of ongoing debt service. So that's for general debt. The TIF-related bonds, your TIF bonds include the 12B and 13A. Those are the two series with the bullet maturities. And those are being paid with the 9/7/50 liquidation proceeds, and then you'll have about that $8 million shortfall I was referring to earlier. And then the amounts that will be used, or the 2013 C bonds that you currently have outstanding, are primarily paid from your current tax increment, about $1.1 million. That tax increment is just a little bit short of the annual payment on those bonds. And then you also have the other revenue source that's available for serving the TIF-related debt is the $770,000 of the garage lease payment.
Mayor Pico?
Trustee Dodge.
That's 770s for the garage, George? Just the garage?
You mean the actual revenue?
Yeah, that's for the ground lease, correct?
The ground lease, correct.
For the whole thing, not
Correct.
just the garage?
Correct. It's the ground lease payment.
Thank you.
So the current and future borrowing paid from the debt service fund. As we already mentioned, the 3.9 million would be the near-term target for annual debt payments. So I just want to make it clear that that is not necessarily meant that it's always going to be 3.9 million. As your capital needs increase or decrease over time, that amount could be adjusted. As current bonds are paid down, the village will be able to layer in the additional debt, keeping your annual payments relatively flat. So you have a lot of debt that's rolling off over here in the next couple of years, which is what enables you to take advantage of this. Assuming that 3.9 million is continued for several years, we estimate it would provide an addition, beyond what we've already have in this plan, an additional 25 to 35 million to finance your 5-year capital plan. The TIF debt refunding plan, that would be to refund the remaining bullet, that $8 million, and to pay the 2013 CGO bonds. So the repayment will occur from the TIF increment and through 2028, that's when the TIF ends. It is estimated at this time that there's not enough to service all that debt. So the plan would be to have to have the bonds be callable that year. And then when you get to that point in time, look at what revenues have developed in the TIF fund, perhaps from growing increment, use that to pay down as much of that debt that's callable at the time of the expiration of the TIF, and the remaining portion will be paid from the lease.
Mr. Chairman,
Trustee Fenton?
is there a way that you can correct that $770,000? Because you have it listed as parking garage lease, and George is saying that it also includes the UIC building ground lease.
Yeah, we'll update the...
So it should be phrased differently. Okay.
So you have one potential refunding candidate for savings, the 13C bonds, which we've already talked about. It's related to the TIF. And there's about 8.6 million outstanding that is callable on December 1st of 21. So unlike your home mortgage, which can be paid off and refinanced at any time, municipal bonds cannot be paid off until their call date. And under current tax law, you can issue a bond to refund that within 90 days of that call date. So it means around September 1st of 2021. The average interest rate on that is just a little bit over 2%. Just give you an idea of how low rates are historically. If you think 2%, you would never refinance that. But in today's current market, we estimate you could refinance that for savings of just over $200,000, which would reduce the amount of TIF increment needed to service this debt, which would free up the increment to pay back the bullet maturity that's refinanced. The specific savings pro forma can be found in the appendix. If really the only way, you can't really refinance this on a tax-exempt basis any sooner than September 1st of 2020. We will look at other options, perhaps trying to lock that in sooner. But at this point, those options haven't been explored. But so you do have market risk on this until you're able to sell it roughly around August of next year, unless we're able to look at ways to do what's called a forward delivery transaction and try to minimize your interest rate risk on these savings. Water, sewer, and stormwater debt. So the village has within its plans to do a water rate study in 2021. And the long-term debt requirements will be factored into this water rate study. So that includes your current debt obligations, the debt obligations of the regional water system, and also your own debt obligations with, there's approximately $10 million or so of this plan of financing that would be payable from your water and sewer fund. Water, sewer, and stormwater fund. And in the appendix, you'll see a high-level review of your current revenues, net revenues available to pay debt service in the system. And a rough approximation is that your operating expenses, your operating revenues would need to grow at a rate approximately 2 percentage points higher than your operating expenses in order to service all the debt. So administration wanted to highlight that this will be a challenge given that the higher rates that you will be forced upon you by the city of Chicago and Oaklawn distribution. But all this will be explored in much more detail in your water rate study to be conducted in 2021. So So I'm going to turn it back over to my colleague, Andrew Kim, here to take a couple slides to talk about the village's rating and some of the factors associated with that rating and a recommendation that we have on your current ratings.
Thank you, Bob. So regarding the village's current rating, the village has two ratings, actually. One is from Moody's, and it's a AA1 rating, and one is from S&P, and it's a AA+ rating. Now, they are, those ratings are noted differently, but they are actually equivalent ratings, given that the scales for Moody's and S&P are depicted a little bit differently. Both of them are right under the very highest possible rating for the village, or for really any rating or any entity that these rating agencies provide ratings for, which is a AAA. And so the second highest is the AA1 or the AA+, indicating the village has a very, very strong credit rating. Now, for bond issues of the size that the village has issued in the past, only one bond rating was probably necessary. So, for example, in 2017, the village issued bonds in the amount of $2.6 million, and it's likely that two ratings were not required for this. A rating cost from each rating agency, it varies based on the size of the deal and based on the rating agency, but they're roughly between $11,500 to $13,000. So incurring two of those ratings really kind of significantly increases the issuance costs for a bond issue. And if the village were to select one rating agency, S&P would likely be the preferred option due to its more favorable approach to pension funding levels. S&P has a different way of calculating pension funding levels that ends up being more favorable to municipalities.
Mayor Pico, can you go back to that page?
Trustee Dodge?
So generally, when I see commentary in generally available press, Moody's often gets quoted, not S&P. So can you explain, take a minute or two, explain what you mean about S&P as a more favorable approach to pension funding levels?
Sure. So there are two ways in which S&P provides more favorable funding levels, more favorable approach to pension funding levels. Number one is the weight that S&P gives to its debt and pension funding levels as a percentage of the overall credit score. So for Moody's, that weight is 20% of the overall credit score is given to pension funding levels. For S&P, that weight is 10%. So as a percentage of the overall credit score, the debt and pensions is going to be a little bit lower from S&P's approach. Secondly,
so it's a weighting issue in their schema, not anything that they're doing in terms of a better actuarial projection of returns for pensions?
Actually, it's both. So the second way is when the rating agencies are determining the liability or the liability of the pension funding, they use different discount rates. Moody's uses a discount rate that is based off of the corporate bond index, which is typically maybe in the 3 to 4% range, and today it might be even lower than that. S&P uses whatever discount factor, or discount rate, I should say, that the community is using in its own CAFR, in its own audit, which typically ranges between, I would say on the very, very low end, 6 3/4%, so 6.75, up to around 7.5%.
So effectively, where Moody's or S&P is taking an assumed rate of return that's in somebody's CAFR.
Yes.
Which is supplied to them by actuaries. And in the state of Illinois, for example, they've been horribly wrong for decades. In fact, one of them, I think, was actually, he lost his actuarial credentials, if I'm not mistaken. So I just wanted to understand, I wanted to understand your numbers. Thank you.
Yep. But then on the other side is how investors are looking at the two different ratings. So the question is, do investors take into account the fact that Moody's and S&P are calculating these pension funding levels differently? And what we have determined by talking to numerous underwriters throughout the last several years is that investors see these ratings equivalently. So a AA1 by Moody's is seen as a AA+ by S&P. So when they're determining the pricing of your bonds, they see them equivalently. Therefore, if one rating agency is more prone to provide a higher credit rating than the other rating agency, then our recommendation is to go with the rating agency that will provide a higher credit rating. So one of the other factors that goes into the overall credit score provided by S&P and Moody's, for that matter, is called the Financial Management Assessment. It's the FMA. That's what S&P calls it. Moody's calls it, I think, just their management score. In the 2017 S&P report for the Village provided by S&P indicates investment reports were made to the Village Board upon request. Investment reports are now provided to the Village Board on a monthly basis. The S&P report also noted that there was a lack of a comprehensive debt management policy, and the finance director now is working on a new policy to be presented and adopted in mid-2021. So this indicates that the Village is taking into account what the conclusion of the report was and making steps to improve the FMA score. And other plans and policies that are included in the FMA score are fund balance policy, capital improvement plan, financial forecasting plan, regularity of budgetary amendments and updates, and pension funding policy or plan. And there was no indication in the 2017 S&P report that any of these other aspects of the FMA were criticized by the Village or for the Village. So, and next steps. Thank you.
So these are the potential next steps, obviously subject to the board wanting to proceed. This is really probably the quickest that we could undertake a plan of finance. Was assuming the board would sign off on the plan by January. At the February 15th meeting of the board, it would consider approval of an ordinance authorizing the issuance of bonds to finance the 20 and 21 projects, which would consist of paying off the line of credit and provide for the projects in 2021, and to refinance the TIF bullet. That would actually be, it'd be a Series 2021A for the projects and the payoff of the line of credit. It'd be a Series 2021B to pay off the TIF bullet. It has to do with the tax status. The new projects would all qualify for tax exemption. The refinancing of TIF bullet would be taxable. It didn't qualify for tax exemption. What that means, just to clarify, make sure everybody's on the same page, when we talk about tax exemption, it means the interest you pay to your investors, whether they have to pay taxes on it or not. If your investors don't have to pay taxes on the interest that you pay to them, they're willing to buy the bonds at a lower interest rate. So consequently, we sell as many bonds as possible as tax exempt to try to capture the lowest interest rate possible. The bonds would be sold on February 16th at the earliest. We did take a look at the calendar of economic calendar around that time. There's no significant economic announcements that day. You're between Fed meetings. You're a couple weeks after the monthly job report, so it's usually a good time then to target. Plus, it's earlier in the week. It's the other thing that we've learned in this current environment where there's a lot of bond supply coming to the market. It's going to be a record year in the municipal bond market for supply, is trying to sell on a Monday or Tuesday so you don't get investors who have said, oh, hey, I would have bought this bond, but we bought all our bonds for the week. So we try to avoid Wednesdays and Thursdays. And the closing would be on March 9th, approximately 3 weeks later. That's when you receive the proceeds, pay off the line of credit, and the last remaining TIF bullet would be refunded. And if the refunding of the 2013 C bonds is in the money, meaning interest rates haven't risen to the point that it's not economically worth refinancing, we would consider approval of an ordinance in July with the bonds sold in August and closed in September. That'd be right in that 90-day window that is permitted by the IRS or by the tax code. Any questions on that timeline? There's an appendix that has all kinds of detailed schedules. We don't plan to go over those tonight, but we are, we can answer questions if somebody wanted to ask a question about any of those.
Mayor Pico?
Trustee Dodge.
Given this timeline, I don't think the probability is high that interest rates will be higher. So we do face some interest rate risk with this timeline, but that's just the nature of the bonds as they're rolling off as scheduled, correct?
Yeah, I mean,
Okay. And then this refunding, the initial refunding operation, if memory serves, was what, 34 million
yes.
to replace all the lines of credit?
Well, half of that's replace the lines of credit, the other half is for providing for this year's financing.
Right. And then future debt load, the village can handle. What you're saying is all the past debt rolls off, that in sometime in the not too distant future, we could absorb another 35 million in debt.
25 to 35 million, assuming you maintain the payment at 3.9 million, and depending on whether the financings are 20 or 25 years and what interest rates are.
Right. And 3.9 million probably sounds to me about what we've been doing for a long time in terms of total debt service.
For governmental related activities, although 1.2 million of that, 3.9 million, half of that 1.2 million goes to each of the bond series that had the bullets. So you've been using that portion of home rule sales tax to service some of that debt.
Right.
So
As planned.
Right.
As planned. And then, so obviously this is a pretty big refinancing operation, taking perfect advantage of the strengths that Orland Park has, as well as fortuitous timing, courtesy of what the Fed's been doing for, I don't know, a hell of a long time now. Right? So it makes sense. I guess I'd like a question answered from staff or from you guys in a not too distant future, which is my recollection of the conversations on the line of credits was at the time that was advantageous to us financially. You alluded to some of the benefits, but clearly there was some interest rate risk and there's other implications about how we paid them off. I'd like to get an understanding, I think it's going to be favorable, but I'd still like to see the numbers, that the net costs of doing this type of capital structure versus what we've just done with lines of credit, accounting for the interest rates present at the time the decision was made, not today's interest rates. I'd like to see if there was a net difference. Because we were convinced by staff and others that at the time, that made sense as a way to structure our debt. I'd like to see that math.
Yeah, we can definitely assist the administration with doing that. And I agree that it did play out to your advantage because interest rates have come down since you did those lines of credit. So now when you take out the long-term financing, the rates will be lower than if you'd done them at the time you did it. Now with the rates being, so I think I might have a portion to your, sort of a forward-looking portion to your backward-looking question, is we did do an analysis today because the question still remains, should we continue doing the lines of credit for the $17 million worth of projects you need in 21 and then take those out later on? And because right now your net rate on the line of credit is what, 60 basis points or so? When you account for the
60 basis points over what?
total. Your formula is 74% of LIBOR plus, I have it written down here.
42 basis points.
Plus 42 basis points.
It's right under 60 total. Yeah.
So,
Plus 12 and a half basis points for the unused portion
correct.
of the line of credit.
So you benefit by borrowing short-term for that versus borrowing up front at your long-term rate. You'll make the difference of that for the period of the year, but you take interest rate risk. And so you benefit for a year on that, but you take interest rate risk on the term of the bonds, which could be 20 to 25 years. Mm-hmm. So we calculate, well, how much would interest rates have to go up between the beginning of the year and the end of the year to eliminate that benefit of continuing to do the line of credits? And that's 15 basis points. So if you wait and do long-term financing at the end of 2021 versus the beginning of 21, and rates go up more than 15 basis points, you've been better off borrowing at the beginning of the year.
Got it.
And it seems reasonable to do that given the low level of interest rates where we're at right now. It seems unlikely that municipal rates will get lower. It could. I mean, I'm not saying I don't have a crystal ball, but it seems the probability is more likely that they would be somewhat higher, as hopefully the economy picks up more into next year.
So in summary, we have the probably the lowest interest rate time period we've ever had, and it's been relatively steady.
Yes.
And we're talking about 15 basis points of difference, which is quite likely to happen when you consider the fact you have a new administration. Anything could happen. So for 15 basis points, and given the fact that we're at a historical low and you have very little to go to zero, right? We have, what, 60, would you say 64 basis points to, is what we're paying?
Well, in your line of credit, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, right.
So it seems like now is the time to take advantage of this for the long term. Not unlike everybody refinancing their mortgages, to put it simply.
Mr. Mayor?
Trustee Calandrello.
So I guess the question, and I'm not an accountant and you're the experts, and that's why we pay you as experts. It seems like the difference of financing now is, the way that I always explain it, is the line of credit is something that we get as we use, versus now it seems like we're just gonna get the big money, stack of money and use it. So I guess, what's the negative, and you're the experts, I'm not, of, instead of just as we need it, most projects take time and projects get pushed back as we see. If we have a big stack of money, we're paying interest every day on that big stack of money. Have you put that into consideration? Is that why you're still recommending just give us a big money, stack of money, and if we have half of that staying there for 2-3 years because projects get pushed back, we're still gonna win, so to speak?
Yeah, I mean, it basically boils down to the market risk of interest rates rising is why you would invoke that strategy, borrowing it up front at a time when your investment return on that money while you're holding it before you spend it, it's not going to be that great. You're going to make maybe 10 basis points on it. It's all about managing interest rate risk. And the probability that you think interest rates would be higher when you did the takeout financing versus they are today. And it seems, we can't use history to predict the future, but it seems where we're at historically on the yield curve, it's more likely that interest rates would be higher a year from now than they would be today. I mean, that's the main factor. I mean, there's always, I suppose, other risks that you're managing are market access risk. For example, I think this is a minor risk. I don't want you to put too much emphasis on it. But when you go back to here, if you were in a situation where you had to sell bonds during this about month and a half period of time, it was really, really hard to sell bonds during that time. I mean, nationally, I think maybe there's like 5 bonds that sold during that week and a half, 2-week period of time. It's just never happened. And so your lines of credit mature at the end of December of next year. Presumably, if the market was like this and you couldn't do the long-term financing takeout, BMO would work with you to roll those lines of credit over, but that's a risk too, counterparty risk, okay? So, those are other types of risks we're managing. Again, I don't think those are huge risks. The main risk is the market risk.
Mr. Mayor?
Trustee Healy.
Jim, thanks for this presentation. I think it's good. What do you anticipate the length of the bonds to be? How far out can we go? And they'd also have a fixed rate of interest and what do you anticipate that longest term interest?
So just a step back, as a home rule village, the Illinois Constitution would permit you to go out to 40 years. That's not a recommendation on our part because you pay a lot of interest on a 40-year financing. You don't get the city of Chicago maybe does 40-year financing, so that's about it. So we're looking at anywhere between 20 to 25 years because, again, we're trying to manage the paying back as little interest as possible, but also managing the fact that we have this constraint of $3.9 million. You have other capital projects that need to be financed. So trying to balance those variables out. So this current plan that we put together, you'll see in the appendice is a 25-year bond issue for the financing to try to lock in that long-term rate for as long as possible and also minimize your market risk on the overall 5-year capital plan. Now, it doesn't mean that bonds you do in 22, 23, and 24 have to be 25 years. Maybe those are only 20 years because interest rates have come up some. But it seems to make the most sense to lock it in now when interest rates are this low. I think in the analysis we have something around 275-ish.
It was a 2.89% for the aggregate financing. Each year will have its own interest rate, but for the aggregate it'll be 2.89%. But we included in that 2.89% a 25 basis point cushion in case interest rates do go up by the time the village actually executes its financing.
And usually, we're even more conservative at 25 basis points. I think if you sold today, you would be below 2.5, even on a 25-year financing.
And you mentioned the penalty for being callable. Will these new bonds have a same
Yeah, so
penalty for being callable?
No, these bonds sold in the municipal bond market are typically callable 8 to 10 years after they're sold at no prepayment penalty. But you can't really refinance them until you get to that call date. The loan you have with the bank is you can pay it off any time, but there's a penalty based off of what the market movement has been. So those are more common in direct bank placements than they are in the municipal bond market. In fact, I haven't seen a call premium on a bond in years.
Oh, yeah.
So,
Thank you.
Mayor Pico.
Trustee Dodge.
So this is a AA rate. How much higher would our rate be if we did a 20-year bond? If I'm doing the ocular regression right, we're going to be under 0.5?
well, this is the AAA rated index. It's a basket of high-grade bonds from across the country.
We're just under it because we made the mistake of building a great town in the state of Illinois.
Right. Yeah, you're penalized by something called the Illinois premium. And Andrew actually has a video on I'm not going to play it here, but it's on our website, and we provide a link to it on the last page of the presentation. I didn't realize it was going to be so far. That last link there, he provides a video talking about the Illinois premium. That's the additional yield that you'll pay on your bonds because your last name is Illinois. And it ranges, for somebody as highly rated as you, it might be 0.5% on a 25-year bond.
Yeah. So that gets to be real money over 20 years.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Yep. And it's sort of an unknown tax that we all pay as constituents of the state, because every local entity pays a higher interest rate. The lower your credit rating is, you might pay an extra 1% because you're located in the state of Illinois.
Continue my question. I want to make sure that I understood the point you made earlier. So we think that we're still, if we went out tomorrow for $35 million, what did you say our first issue was, 35 million, 34 million? Is that still a micro deal, or is that now big enough that you'd get a number of takers for that bond issue, as opposed to one bank or one iBank scooping it up?
Yeah, you would get, I know you recently did a bond sale for AAA Wilmette, right?
Yep. Yeah, we did.
How many bidders did you get on that one? The tax exempt one, not the taxable one.
I want to say we had about 8 bidders, and that was a 30-year financing, so which is even more rare than the 20 or 25 year that we are proposing here.
And it was about the same size, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was about the same size. It was about 30 million.
So we should attract decent bids, a decent number of bids.
You're going to get some of the, you'll get the regional firms like a Stiefel, Robert W. Baird, or Meserole will be bidding on, but you also see Citi and Chase and some of the large Morgan Stanley coming in and bidding on it too.
If we were to do this tomorrow as a hypothetical question, what do you think our rate would be at AA plus? We use S&P.
I think
it would be 2 and a quarter.
2.5.
2.5.
Yeah. On a 25 year, if you shorten it up, you might shave off, I don't know, 20 basis points.
And then, as Trustee Healy said, all of these things, if you do a 20-year bond, you really can't call it for 8 years, correct? So that's the explicit trade-off with lines of credit as to when you want to get out of them.
Right. Well, the line of credit is never meant to be the long-term financing. It's the short-term. Right.
And then when you pull the money, if you don't immediately, what is that window before it stops becoming tax-free?
Well,
if we got $20 million tomorrow.
Right. When you close on the bond, your bond counsel, which is the law firm, will make you sign a tax certificate that has within there your agreement of an expectation to spend 85% of that money in 3 years.
Within 3 years, got it.
Yeah.
Okay, so that is considerably longer than I think a number of us on this board have been told previously. We had been indicated by prior staff that it was a much shorter fuse before you started winding up with taxable arbitrage issues. Is that technically correct, or was that an error?
Well, I think that's maybe a couple different things we're talking about. So in order for the bonds to be tax exempt, you have to have a reasonable expectation to spend 85% in 3 years.
In 3 years, got it.
But then there's, I think you're talking about in your follow-up question, there's spin down requirements where you could, you have to, by certain milestones, and I don't have the exact percentage.
That's fine,
but
just
like it's 6
general.
months, you have to spend 30%, and 12 months, you have to spend 60%. 18 months, you have to spend 90%, and then you could keep any arbitrage earnings. So if your bond rate was 2.5%, and you could earn 2.75, you could keep the extra 25 basis points. Well, in this environment, you're not going to earn your bond rate.
I don't think we can by law.
Well, you can. No, you can exceed your bond rate and keep that as long as you meet the spin down requirements. But you're not going to be able to just because
Right.
short-term investment rates are too low.
Any other questions? Thank you very much for the presentation. You want to go into the departments?
Could I get the pointer?
Sorry.
Okay, so now, so thank you very much, Bob and Andrew. We still have a lot of work to do, but we're on solid footing here for our plan. So now what we're going to do is we're just going to go into departmental highlights. Each department will kind of just talk about some of their highlights. So we'll start with the administration. So in administration, we have a couple of goals as part of our budget. First is the organization-wide accreditation process. So each department is going to go through some type of accreditation process. Some of them could be done in less than a year. Some will take 4 years. As an example, Public Works will go through the APWA, American Public Works Association accreditation process. What that does is what we will be doing is acknowledging best practices and incorporating those into our organization. So once we're done with each department going through accreditation, then we will do a overall organizational accreditation through ISO 9001. They have that for local governments, and we're going to seek that. The other important goal for next year is going to be our strategic plan and our 5-year financial plan. So we're talking about debt, and we're talking about 5-year capital plans. And so all of that gets thrown into the pot, starts mixing up, and then we see what comes out of that. So that's going to be a very important element for next year. And what we've already started, and we're going to really, it's going to take off in '21, is the establishment of a comprehensive staff training and development program. Denise will talk about that here in a little bit. Another thing that's really important for us next year is going to be the completion of our comprehensive upgrade of our website. The board has seen some of the work that we're doing, and we hope to have that first quarter of '21. You know, that's really important because there's when a lot of people, especially with COVID, a lot of people are looking for an all-access type website, a 24/7 city hall, and so that's where we're going towards. Another thing that we've already talked about and that we want to have completed in '21 is our 311, our Orland Park 311 system. It's another tool for service delivery. And then finally, an important project that we're also going to undergo is a recodification process. It's taking our existing village code and just going through it, reformatting it, rewriting it into the new code structure, but also reviewing elements of it that may be obsolete, redundant. So it's a very healthy exercise. It's a lot of work. All of the departments are involved with that, but it gets us to where it's just kind of a cleanup, and you have to do that periodically. Does anybody have any questions here?
Mayor Pico? Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Trustee Fenton?
The website, we've been working on supposedly improving that for years. What's taking so long? I mean, I know we had that person left, and then all these other things, but it's been a nightmare for numerous years.
Yeah. So the website the existing website that we have right now is I believe it was approved in 2017 with Civic Live. Is that right? And it just didn't work out. For whatever reason, it didn't work out. So the product that we have right now, I mean, everybody agrees is an inferior website. So what the board did a few months ago was approve a contract with Granicus. Granicus is the folks that do the iLegislate. And they're also the major player for municipal websites. So I can't say what happened with the old website, but the new website is from scratch. We're not even taking, we've taken a whole new approach towards the website. And there's a committee that's set up. And the thing about a website that's very important is it has to be fresh. It has to have the information that folks are looking for. Right now, the website is just it's difficult to update. And what will happen with the Granicus website is each department will have access to it, so they can do quick upgrades to it.
And you said, I know you say completed in 2021. Is that February? Is it December?
We're shooting for February.
Okay.
Yep, because we already, if you a few weeks ago I sent out there was a little link that had, they walked through it. And so that there are some very important milestones that we've already reached that way. So once we get the website where it needs to be, and then all of the departments will start populating their individual pages. And then once that occurs, those reps from those departments are going to maintain that so it stays relevant.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Mayor Pico?
Trustee Dodge.
George, when was the last update to the strategic plan? A couple of years back, correct?
There you go.
So, okay, so then we'll update the strategic plan. I'm assuming we're going to tie it then to, as you describe it here, a 5-year financial plan, correct?
Correct.
Okay, and so will some of those 5-year projections that we've used historically to kind of see where we were from a fund balance perspective to do things like the early retirement program, those will be part of the go-forward 5-year plan, those types of looks?
Absolutely. We're going to
these debt financing operations?
All of that. Everything for a comprehensive 5-year, obviously one of the very important elements of it is a CIP too. And so right now our CIP is good early years. It's not good for 5 years. So it's kind of a wish list when you're looking out in out years. So what we're going to come up with is knowing the parameters that we have. So we know we're going to be able to estimate what our revenues are going to be, for the next 5 years. We know what our expenses are going to be within existing parameters. When when the board agrees on a capital improvement plan, that's the other parameter that goes into that. So you do all of that, and you do all of your debt and everything, and then you see, well, what can we do? What else can we do within that 5 years?
Yeah, so George, I would agree that you can do a reasonable projection on your costs. You can do a reasonable projection on where you want to be from a capital improvements perspective. The hardest challenge will be estimating revenues.
What you have, it's
George,
definitely a challenge.
It'll be tough.
It's definitely a challenge, but you have to, we're going to do our best effort on it. Nothing that, I think if we did a 5-year plan a year ago, right, before COVID, this whole thing, the 5-year plan would have you could toss it away. So that's what it is. It's a tool for planning. However, once we put a 5-year plan together, it doesn't end there. This plan gets reevaluated every year for the next 5 years. So it just starts at, it's not like we're gonna have a 5-year plan and in the 5th year we're like, okay, we're done. Year 1 it resets another 5 years.
Any other questions? Next.
Denise?
Good evening. Past several months, we've all been presented with a great opportunity, especially our new department heads, to pivot agility and resilience and speed. The result in HR is that we're finding that we have new ways to provide service to all of our employees, and at the same time reimagine and embrace village-wide initiatives where we can transform and really push forward. Some of the things that we're looking for into 21, we'll continue to enhance those initiatives. That includes some village-wide customer service training, as well as some of our leadership development program training. The focus on these trainings is really to help us to develop teams and groups of leaders, to develop our succession plan for the future, to look at customer service training, so that we can be more responsive with a higher level of service and accountability for all of our staff. One of the things I also mentioned was accreditation, and that's something that is we're looking at it as a village-wide opportunity. HRCI is an organization, the Human Resource Certification Institute is a credentialing organization. It offers certifications to administrators and managers. So we'll pursue those resources for mastery and excellence for human resources as it fits into our overall organizational structure. We're hoping that we remain productive and agile to invest all of our team and to continue to seek out other opportunities for HR to continue to develop. We're not as exciting as some of the other departments. We just have a lot of policies and forms. We're hoping what's not on here also is to upgrade our personnel manual, our employee manual, all of our policies that really haven't been looked at in several years. So we appreciate your support and appreciate any of your comments. Thank you.
Ed?
All right, thank you, George, and members of the village board. To start off, some of our development services initiatives for 2021 mimic the direction that's being provided for the organization as a whole. We are going to be pursuing the accreditation programs through the International Code Council and the International Economic Development Council for the functions and development services. In conjunction with updates to our village-wide strategic plan, it's appropriate at this time for us to look at our comprehensive plan for land use and development. In addition to that, a strategic economic development plan is currently in the works that will come forward to the village board to provide the direction to staff as we move through some of these uncertain times, but the impacts that they're going to have on the built environment in Orland Park. We've brought an annexation study that we will continue and finalize in 2021. These will all be used to formulate the overall strategic goals and priorities for the village. And one of the things to speak on that are going to make a big effort in 2021, and something that I think we've seen in response to some of the pandemic restrictions and things that are necessary for the business community, is our business retention and expansion program. I think right now we get to see, we're trying to come up with various programs to help businesses and to see where they need it the most. And if we are able to get in front of them beforehand and understand what difficulties they're having, that this business retention and expansion program, to meet with them before the problem occurs or to anticipate it or work with them as soon as possible. So go to the next slide. You're familiar with a lot of these, but we have a whole mess of projects on deck for 2021. So it is good news. We have seen some decreases in the amount of activity, but to name a few, Pete's Fresh Market's going to do a large-scale redevelopment. We saw Stan's Donuts is going to be taking occupancy of the former PDQ. We're still seeing, in addition to some of the recent retailers that we've added to Orland Park or that we've backfilled due to some of the programs that the board has instituted, we're still seeing residential development. The sites that the village has left are a little bit more challenging than they have been in the past. So what the board and anticipation, what you guys can see for development proposals as smaller lots and more units. So it's something to consider. The reasons being for that is the price of land has gone up and the buildability hasn't necessarily followed suit. So when we bring these before you, those are the things that the staff planners and inspectors and plan reviewers are dealing with, and that's something to keep in mind. We are still seeing some, little by little, some development in our Orland Park Business Center, so we're offering some industrial employment opportunities, and that's something that will come online here in 2021 as well. And this last slide speaks to just the trend that we've seen. So these numbers that you see, 2021 is in, or 2020 is in purple, 2019 is in blue, and 2018 is green. This is strictly permit activity and development review. So for commercial permits, you can see a general decrease in the amount of permits that we've issued in 2020 as compared to the previous years. But that has a lot to do with the uncertainty of whether or not a business was going to invest in their property during this year. What I'd like to draw the attention to in terms of development review as well as residential permits that were issued, right now we're about 300 permits off of our normal pace, and the 2020 numbers only through today. So with I just want to frame everyone's reference that we're expecting a significant decrease in the amount of permits that are being processed, reviewed, and issued, but we're not seeing that in the trend. And you know, obviously nobody can predict what's going to happen, but I would anticipate that in addition to what we're seeing here, we may even see an increase in 2021 if we don't see similar restrictions reinstituted like we did at the beginning of this year. So it's been a crazy year. It's going to be busy next year, and I'm happy to answer any of your questions.
Mayor Peacock.
Trustee Dodge.
Ed, typically the residential permits could be everything from repairing the roof to a major build-out, correct? It's the building permits for people investing in their Orland Park homes.
Correct.
Got it. Where would we record net new construction and housing?
The residential permits was where, according to this
No,
is where
but we've seen substantial investment in people investing in their Orland Park homes.
Correct.
That's been continued for a while. Thank you.
Thanks, Ed. Krashid?
Good evening. So starting next year, our plan is to bring some of the engineering reviews in-house, but still maintain some specialty reviews for consultants. The intent is to reduce the overall cost that we currently pay to the consultants and still include that we want to standardize and have a consistency in our reviews. The specialty services that we would retain from consultants would probably include stormwater, lighting, that kind of stuff. And we're currently developing several standard operating procedures. And the purpose of that is, again, is any engineer that does reviews for us will be able to follow that procedure, that standard, and we should be able to maintain similar quality of reviews. The next item on that is earlier this year, actually middle of this year, we created a parking traffic and advisory committee. I believe it used to be here at the village several years back. It was recreated in a different format. The purpose for that is different departments within the village receives requests for signs, stop signs, parking signs, and similar requests, traffic signals for that matter as well. And we were not consistent in providing a response to the residents, not just in the quality of our response, but also the timing of that. So this department was created by the VMO. The VMO chair, assistant village manager chairs that, and the departments that are are police department, public works, and engineering. Those are the four departments that we currently represent this committee. These are public meetings where people have come in, people have called in, and then they have made their cases. In fact, in many cases, they have rebuttal our decisions. But the good part on that is we are able to educate them why some of the things that we can do and some of the things we cannot. And on top of that is we have brought in a consistency in that. Next slide, please. We have made some good progress on Dr. Marsh project. Several weeks ago, we brought this discussion to the village board. As the village know that the Stellwagen farm was acquired through open lands, funds from Open Land and Open Land Commission. And it was originally purchased in 2002 with a total cost of about $6 million. Of that, $2 million was donated by IDNR. So once we received and used that fund, it brought in some stipulations that was required that the Stellwagen farm be converted into a prairie lands, and we cannot do the farming over there. But the agreement between the village and Open Land Commission and the Stellwagen Foundation requires that we maintain some level of farming over there. So at that, a solution came up that where we swapped the land with Dr. Marsh, and that's what we presented to IDNR. And so I have been communicating with the people at IDNR, and they have accepted a solution where they have agreed that about a $600,000 solution would be acceptable to them, which would allow us to build about a 600 to 800 long pathway into the wetland, and with one lookout. And the plan is that we are requesting $66,000 to design this year and go for design in 2021 and go for construction with about $550,000 in 2022.
So the only thing I have to add is PTAC was a very good addition because I'm assuming that the trustees probably see some of the same things I do on a regular basis about traffic and speeding and cut-throughs and all those types of things. This gives us a process to go through. We all know, sitting on this board, that there's a lot more to it. Certainly had people demanding that we put a stop sign right in the middle of their street, and I'm like, that's going to get a kid killed, because no one's going to be looking to stop in the middle of your street, but your kid who lives in the neighborhood is going to think you're going to stop. So, we think about those things, and a perfect example is we recently had one about all the speeding in the subdivision, and we did a 7-day traffic.
Yes, sir.
And how many tickets did we write? 2?
Yeah, 2.
Yeah. So usually what's actually happened when we get the data versus what people perceive are very different, so it's an opportunity for us to educate them. And of course, if we do find a situation where it is warranted, we now have a process for doing that. So I think including all of the departments in that is appropriate. So I appreciate you guys putting that together.
Mr. Mayor?
Trustee Calandrello.
George, just so I know, is this our time to ask more detailed questions, or are we have?
Absolutely.
I just want to make sure I follow the rules. What's our turnaround time for permits and engineering, give or take?
It depends on the complexity of the project, but I would say we are turning around in 4 to 6 weeks. Not permit, but I would say the engineering reviews.
The only reason why I asked, I know that some villages, if the developer wants to, they can pay an express fee that we can, so instead of our own village employee do it, we can send it out, but they pay for that service, so it's quicker. Have you ever looked into that? If the developer's willing to pay the extra freight, we could send it out, cost us nothing, and then the developer's happier because he gets his plan back in 2 weeks instead of 6 to 8. That's something that other villages do that I don't think we've ever looked into. If it's not cost us anything, it's making them happy. I know a couple of big developers would welcome that. I just wanted to be able to look into that.
We'll look into that. That's a
good idea.
Yeah, I've seen that in other organizations. If they want to pay for that's a good idea. That's something that we'll put on our list.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman?
Trustee Fenton.
I just want to compliment staff for getting that Dr. Marsh project down to $600,000 instead of, I think it was a $6 million project when it was first, the Cadillac.
The Cadillac solution was about $6 million.
Yes, and so this is much better.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Appreciate it. Kevin?
Thank you. So in finance, our critical effort this year is going to be the implementation of the new ERP system. This is going to be a village-wide project, but really it's going to be focused heavily with IT and finance. We are the heavy users of that system, and at least getting that up and running. So there's quite a bit that needs to be done internally in advance of that, and as we roll through that, each individual process needs to be reviewed and looked at, and so that's going to be a critical effort for the finance department this year. Another is our financial forecast. That's going to be, as we've alluded to earlier, it's going to roll in several different financial planning components, other plans, if the parks plan's involved, the capital plan, this debt component is also a critical feature of that as well. So we want to have something that is forward-looking, and we can look at different scenarios to see where we'll end up over the next several years, and have that be updatable and each and every year. Also, we are looking and continue to review, revise, and document our financial policies. We're looking to build on the documents that we currently have and centralize those and put them in a centralized location, so that we can have the policies in place, top to bottom, debt management policy, all of those things that were mentioned earlier, have those documented in one central locations. In addition to that, there is some good documentation of some procedures throughout the department. We're going to continue to update those and review those, and of course, with a new ERP, we're going to have quite a few new procedures that it's going to require some time and attention as well. The village does participate, and we continue to encourage our participation in the GFOA budget program, the CAFR program, and the PAFR program. We have submitted each of those award programs for the past several years, and we will continue to do so. Those are critical standards to form what is included in our external documents and how we communicate information to the public. So we'll keep doing that as well. The Finance Department is undergoing, or is about to undergo, an office renovation. That's, I think, driven by first and foremost safety and security issues, so that's the main driver. But what is some other tangible results that we're going to see? It's going to unify our group. It's going to take away 2 locked doors in between half of our work group and the other. So that's going to increase or improve our team atmosphere, and probably even more importantly, there's going to be better workspace for oversight and support for our customer service needs, and just overall operational efficiency. The Finance Department we're a customer service department, and we have different levels of customer service, or different faces of customer service, and one of those is our cashier station, where we provide customer service to our customers, our businesses, anybody that walks in the door, we provide the customer service there. So we want to provide those folks with the best customer service support, so when issues arise that they have the support available there as well. We also are customer service to decision makers, departments, and some of our financial reporting is intended to improve customer service to you all as decision makers, to the residents, to department heads, so they can manage their departments. So we look at customer service from a number of different vantage points. Another item that's been discussed several times is our water rate study. We are drafting the RFP now. One of the components of that is how we're going to determine rates for the Orland Ridge area. The village gets one water rate. We pay for water one flat rate from the village of Oak Lawn, and in Orland Ridge it's going to be a little bit different because it passes through Tinley and Illinois American, and their rate structure is tiered. So as we consume more water in that subdivision, the cost of the commodity decreases. The village's overall rate, when customers use more water, what we charge to customers as they use more water, actually increases, and I believe that is to factor in high water usage for industrial or commercial use and that type of thing. So we need to be able to reconcile that. The costs are going in 2 different directions, so this water rate study is going to look at that and come up with some recommendations on how we deal with that, and be mindful of why we have the rate structure in place now, and how we can have a rate structure going forward for the Orland Ridge area as well as the rest of the village. We continue to look at operational efficiency in all of our processes, streamlining things when and where we can, improving processes. We are implementing we're calling a listening tour within the village for our accounts payable processes. We're talking with each and every department to see what is working well, what is perhaps not working well, so we can know their pain points and work to improve the process that is more efficient for everybody throughout the village, as we can understand what's happening there and be just overall more efficient. I alluded to financial reporting. We're trying to improve our financial reporting, and that gives the departments the tools that they need to know where they're spending. It gives them some better oversight and management on the finances, but also for accountability purposes on how much they're spending and that type of thing. We've also mentioned a few times we're looking at our chart of accounts. That's something that's going to be required when we go to a new ERP system. We've made some adjustments to some of our charts of accounts, added some line items and things like that where it's appropriate, and that improves our system. It creates a more efficient system, but also just for reporting purposes, we can do things to enhance our financial reporting. So that's the finance department side that we don't get to talk about too much. We were normally talking about bigger things like debt and all that fun stuff, but that's internal operations of the finance department happening in 2021.
Mr. Chairman?
Trustee Fedden.
Kevin, I just have a question. In the presentation from those financial advisors, they noted that a lack of comprehensive debt management policy, we had that problem. So if we had that problem, how did we end up getting all of these financial awards all these years?
The financial awards look at a number of different things. It's not a specific audit or review of all of our policies. So for example, the Comprehensive Annual Financial Report Award does not provide an opinion on how well you are operating your finances, but it provides an opinion on how well you present the information that you currently have. So the ratings review process, they do a little bit different perspective. They look at your financial policies that are in place, and they make an evaluation based on their experience on your ability and willingness to pay, your credit worthiness. So it's a different review. The budget award, it looks at how you present your spending plan. You can have a big red number at the end of it, and you can still get the budget award. I wouldn't recommend that, but they look at things in a little bit different perspective. Those awards are about how well do you present the information that you have. It's not an accreditation or a review of your existing policy. So
is this just that particular financial company's opinion, or is this something that should have been caught by our finance director prior to you?
Some communities have more robust and thorough debt policies and procedures. Some have not. Some that I've worked for have not wanted to document that. They just take the debt issuances as they need them. Mm-hmm. They don't have a formal policy. So that's a matter of local preference, and that was identified by S&P as something that we could have in place that I think would be probably a good thing to do.
And do you know why we weren't notified of this before?
I don't know.
Okay. Yeah. Thanks.
Mayor Pico?
Trustee Dodge.
Have we ever gone past the 8% in terms of our debt service ratio?
Not that I could see in the past. I looked back to 20-some years. I did not see that we were.
Because that was, perhaps it wasn't documented to our preferred current standards, but that's been a long-standing policy of prior boards. So I think I want to clearly state that I think updates and revisions to policies with an extension and codifying what's been long-standing precedent and practice is always a good thing. And I personally wanted to say thank you for recognizing, because it's not clear to me previous finance departments did, that there is a pretty strong public service element to what you do in terms of that front counter. So thank you for that.
Thanks, Kevin. So So now we have IT.
Good evening. 17 months ago, I started, and in my interviews with, I think, Mayor Pekow and Trustee Milani and Trustee Dodge, we talked about the various IT challenges and that we had to overcome. And I remember the statement, we'll give you as much as you can eat. So as you can see by what we're presenting this year, we're pretty hungry. And we've got a lot on our table. Kevin took some of the thunder away on the ERP. And many departments, and they call them CIO killers, ERP projects, because no one wants to tackle them because of their complexity and challenges. But I kind of look at it, especially with all the new directors and a lot of the new staff we have and trustees as well, that this is a tremendous team building exercise. And it could really build our group and be a very collaborative effort, and it really has to be in order to succeed. So as you can see here, in IT, we've got basically two sides of the house, operations and projects. And so the CIP projects there are ERP replacement. We'll be working very closely with finance as well as the other departments. It will be a full agency effort in that project. We also have, on the infrastructure side, our network cabling infrastructure's got to get replaced in most of our facilities, as well as our network communications and our telephone system, which was identified this year until we realized those two other elements had to be fixed first. So we're tackling all three of those next year. Also, our virtual server platform is end of life and needs to be replaced. And also that needs to be put in place to house our new ERP software system. We've talked about the boardroom and civic center audiovisual system. I think we've all experienced various challenges with those systems. Right now we've got a contractor that we're working with on a design that will help us design the ideal system for this boardroom, the lobby, as well as at the Civic Center, because they each have unique needs and requirements. We're also going to tackle a number of cybersecurity system enhancements. I don't want to get into the details of that for obvious reasons, but if any of you have questions as to exactly what we're getting into there, I'll be happy to discuss those with you. But as you know, cybersecurity is always a priority, and you can never take your eye off the ball there. And then finally, our IT ticketing and help desk software. That's something we need. That's kind of like IT's ERP system, so we can measure our performance. How are we doing? Where are we having support issues? What do we need to fix and look at? We're also want to offer that as an opportunity for finance and the village manager's office and other departments that may need some way to measure internal service tickets and that type of thing. On the operating budget side of things, we're going to be in our second year of our workstation replacement plan. We have about 70 workstations we've targeted village-wide to replace, to go hand in hand with our telecommunications systems upgrade. The circuits probably, most likely, will need to be renewed or upgraded because they will require different technology there. As always, we are standardizing our processes, documentation, and procedures. We had a lot of rule by exception, not a lot of standardization. It was very hard to identify problems and fine-tune things. So by doing this, it's just standard best practices there. We're also going to be looking at our multifunctional printer replacements. Those are the big copier scanner devices. What we want to do is try to reduce the number of standalone printers we have, which are very expensive to maintain, very expensive per print. have staff use multifunctional printers to reduce costs. Also, we're not measuring our printing. Be nice to know how much we're printing, who's printing, what it's costing us, so we can try to reduce cost and consolidate. And then finally, our SharePoint internet pilot, try to get a pilot out there for an internal intranet site where we can share and collaborate, gets into teamwork, and so forth. I know that's something that Denise has been chomping at my heels to try to get done. So with that said, I'll take any questions.
Mr. Chairman?
Trustee Malani.
Throughout all the department presentations, we've been talking a lot about creating plans and documentation and content. And you're touching on the SharePoint intranet. So my thought is, are we looking at a comprehensive content and document management strategy along with this? Because I think, as we start looking to being more efficient, if we could have a single source of the truth for all of these documents and be able to get a single source where you can find the right information at the right place at the right time, I think that would really help kind of push in the realm of being more efficient. If we could find things faster and be able to have that single source of data, I think it really helps answer some of the key questions that we're looking for on a regular basis. So if we could start thinking about maybe as part of this internet pilot, maybe there's a way that we could have that, because George sends stuff out through Dropbox. We have OneDrive, you're going to have SharePoint. So we still have all these disparate sources of data. You're still all over the place. So if there's a way we could bring it together, I think that'd be a good project to see in the near future.
Yeah, definitely. It's always a challenge because ERP systems have their own enterprise content management, which we're going to be proposing with the ERP project. And that, of course, integrates magically into their software. So the challenge is do you go with a separate product that you integrate with everything else? Or do you go with, so there's a challenge, but we will definitely have to put a strategy together to say, okay, for this types of things, we're doing this, for this, we're doing that. Police is moving ahead with their Laserfish integration for their CAD RMS system, and Laserfish is an enterprise content management system. So that's something we already own and haven't really leveraged and taken advantage of. But I think we could use pieces of all of that to kind of get at what you're looking for there.
Great. Okay, thank you.
Thanks a lot, Dave. Chief?
Thank you. I'll be brief. I know you've got a lot of information overload here. Here's our problem. We're struggling to find high-caliber, qualified officers to join the force. This is a national epidemic, ladies and gentlemen, a national epidemic. So here's a possible solution to our problem. It's a long-term solution, not a short-term plan. Right now, our problem is that we're depleting our current list 1 year earlier than planned. This is the second time we've gone through this issue. So we're going to deplete our current eligibility list in January 2021 versus January 2022. Why is it happening? A lot of them, quite frankly, they're not passing the background. They're not passing the background. We're not getting the high caliber people that we used to have. One particular agency up north, a highly affluent agency, had one person take their police exam just recently. One person. 10% of my law enforcement officers can retire tomorrow. 10%. Another 7% can retire by the end of next year. 25% of my sworn personnel can retire in 5 years. 5 years. So how do we address this issue? I want to grow and cultivate a farm team. I want to grow my CSOs, my detention aides, young men and women who have a feeling, may want to become a police officer. I want to sponsor them for a part-time police academy, whereupon they will go to the academy for 8 months, 2 weekends per year, at a cost to the village of $1,800. Working with Klein Thorpe and Jenkins, I have a contract they would sign for a 2-year commitment to be a part-time officer in the Orland Park Police Department. If they do not perform academically, they get terminated or they get hired by another agency, they'd be responsible for paying that money back. However, if they in fact become a full-time police officer of the village of Orland Park prior to the 2 years, we obviously would waive that fee. So that's the goal that we're looking at. We've got a lot of outstanding potential recruits there. The CSOs and detention aides are very dedicated, very loyal. They understand our organization as a whole. They drink the Orland Park Kool-Aid, to be quite frank with you. They understand our culture, our leadership. So that's what I'm looking to do. With that, I would ask for the board's approval to allow me to increase the number of part-time officers for the Village of Orland Park Police Department. Based on historically for my budget, we will not eclipse or the amount of payroll for that particular line item, so we'd stay within that budget, even if we hired an additional part-time officers. My body-worn camera program. We're looking to install some body-worn cameras. That we're conducting a pilot study starting December 17th with Axon. Very expensive. That's why we're going through this particular thing, putting it through its paces to identify strengths and limitations of each in particular vendor. We have 3 vendors, Axon, WatchGuard, and Panasonic. A lot of these studies shown that body cameras do not lower the level of use of force or number of times the use of force. We don't have a use of force problem in Orland Park. I work in internal affairs for 7 years. I've only had one excessive use of force complaint, and that was unfounded. Currently, the Orland Park Police Department has a 97% clearance rate of non-sustained complaints when we have an in-car video. We feel that will, in fact, increase by the fact of having body cameras there. We want to be transparent. We want to be professional. We want to show the members of the Village of Orland Park the kind of quality these law enforcement officers do each and every day. And having that body camera with ample storage will provide us that opportunity. Does anybody have any questions or concerns?
Mayor Pico.
Trustee Dodge.
Chief, what's the current set of rules you operate under, courtesy of the state of Illinois, for retention? Because these files get to be pretty big.
They do. So it's 90 days unless it's involved in an arrest that we've got to hold it until we get a court order to have it.
So it's 90 days?
90
so
days.
Nothing gets flagged in that 90 days. You can just get on and clean up that disk space, so to speak.
That's correct, unless it's an arrest, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Last thing I want to do is if I can for a moment, just introduce my new deputy chief, Eric Rossi. He'll start January 4th. We're excited. Eric's an 18-year veteran in the Orland Park Police Department. He's got outstanding reputation as well as experience working with the Southborough Major Crimes Task Force. He worked internal affairs, and now he's the current commander of investigations.
Congratulations, Eric. Now your golf game is going to get even worse. So a couple of things. I think that's a fantastic idea with the part-time police. That's thinking outside the box, come up with a solution to what we know is a long-term problem, and that's fantastic. Regarding the body-worn cameras, one question I have for you is what do we project the cost to be to handle the FOIAs that we're going to get regarding these cameras? Do we have an idea of what we're going to need personnel-wise?
Typically, it's one full-time additional employee. However, with the village manager's assistance, we're looking at a Brazos system that's going to help eliminate a lot of the double inputting of our current citations. So I anticipate utilizing that person more to address those FOIA requests. So I'm not looking to fill or add an additional employee for that.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Mr. Mayor. Mr. Mayor.
Trustee Calandrello.
I just have a quick question for the chief. I ask this every year. So is there anything that you need or something that you really want that's not in the budget? And if so, what is that?
The only guy I'm going to ask is after we conduct this field study, we're going to have to sit down with the village manager's office and discuss the total cost of ownership for this particular body cam program. Estimations right around about $100,000 per year to support that type of program.
Thanks, Chief. Joel?
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm excited to present some Public Works information on our operating budget. This year, your budget that you have before you, we included the parks and the CPAC and the forestry, all part of the NRF umbrella. So we did split that with the record department on that. I highlight that we really are looking at the 3 pots of funds, really the operating capital projects and capital projects this year. What I'm looking at that is from an operating perspective is trying to create a flat line for out years as we project out years of instead of it waiving every year because of smashing projects within that pot. Our operating budget, really looking at meeting regulatory inspections, maintaining and repairing our facilities and the other items listed there on the screen. In Public Works, we're also looking at the high-performing department, as George had mentioned, with the APWA accreditation. It's a 4-year process, really, and the product I've seen, it's like 800 pages long by the time you complete it. So it's going to be a huge task that we're going to be starting this year and getting into that. Along with that, we're looking at the arborist and arboretum accreditation for forestry. And we're also just looking at improving our process and procedures during that process. Whatever we can bite off this year, we'll be doing that. And looking at improving our risk management, that's really the safety. We've done our safety audits recently, and we're looking at those process and procedures within our safety envelope to improve that at Public Works, which, as you know, Public Works has a lot of high-risk jobs. Not as high risk as police, but we do have other jobs that we do that, whether we're dealing with chemicals or a piece of equipment and so forth. Looking at from a staff, we're really trying to invest in our people. Our people are our key for Public Works. It also is also about being a very disciplined organization. Part of that accreditation will drive that discipline within our folks. And that's develop our staff, set expectations, hold them accountable, and so forth, improve our performance evaluations with HR. We're also looking at safety and equipment training, and also making sure they have the right tools to do the job. They can't do it if they don't have that. You guys have been great in doing this past years to succeed in that. From a planning and asset management, really is to complete our assessments of what we have. That really drives what we need to do in a long-range master plan that George has talked about. You got to know what you have, you got to know what the condition of that asset is, then to develop those projects. And so we're looking across the board on all our assets to do that. And lastly, from an operational perspective, we talked a little bit about 311 already. Also just refining our Tyler system. And one of the things in Tyler is preventive maintenance. We really want to roll that out next year and set that up for our particular areas in Public Works. We also want to look at project execution. We talked about forecasting projects. We want to use a Gantt chart as a way to manage those projects through the year so we can track and we understand what a schedule is and meeting that schedule to also forecast into the next year. So this will help us also working with finance to help having the conversation with them with contracting tools so that we can execute these projects that we have before us this year. Lastly, also, this is very important, is the enterprise fleet lease options will be presented to you guys for analysis of that analysis and recommendations.
Part of the matrix study that the village board approved.
Yes, you already proved that. It's just the actual completion of that.
Yeah. My only comment there is I wouldn't put those as enterprise fleet lease options. It's our vehicle fleet options, of which enterprise leasing is one of those potential options, because we're kind of jumping to the conclusion as opposed to looking at the data to determine it.
Yeah, I meant enterprise-wide, sorry, not the actual enterprise company.
Okay.
Mayor Peacock?
Trustee Dodge.
Thank you. That was it. Thank you for pointing that out. It's not necessary.
Yeah.
Actually, yes. Okay. Okay, thanks a lot, Joel.
Thanks, Joel.
Ray?
Good evening. Thank you all for this opportunity to present highlights from the Recreation and Parks Department for your consideration. I've got quite a bit to go through tonight. As you know, the pandemic has hit Recreation and Parks pretty hard, as it has hit all of us, but especially our revenues. Our revenues are down this year, and we expect next year they'll be down around $3.1 million. It's about 24% from pre-pandemic levels of 2019. As we move forward in 2021, we expect to recover from the pandemic and gain the confidence in the public again, gaining their trust in building fitness memberships, recreation programs, rental revenues, participation in special events, and sponsorships. Last night we hosted the Holiday Fest and tree lighting, and I thought that was an encouraging sign that we had great attendance there last night. So I think that shows that the public is ready to come back out and celebrate with us. Specific things that we're going to be doing in 2021, we're going to be eliminating the spring musical. That musical is an expensive musical at about $22,000, so we're going to hold back on that next year. The dance recital is usually in the summer, early summer. We anticipate doing that at the Cultural Center versus Sandburg. That'll save about $3,500. Earlier this year, we eliminated after-school PALs. We'll realize a full year savings of $121,000 next year. In 2021, we're excited to bring back the Centennial Park West Concert Series. We have 2 dates with the same bands that we had last year on June 26th and August 14th. The total cost of that is projected to be $366,000 with $156,000 in revenue based on ticket sales of 2,100 tickets. We're also projecting or proposing to offer a third concert late summer, early fall for approximately $38,000. Market at the Park is a popular summer feature. We've been hosting that for 8 weeks for the last few summers. We're proposing to extend that 2 additional weeks. We receive a lot of comments and feedback. They would like additional dates. The market, as the weeks go on, had strong attendance all through the summer, so we project doing 2 more weeks at a cost of $4,500. Last year we did really well with the drive-in movies, so we offered 3 drive-ins, each one selling out. They were expensive. As we learned our way through that, they're still expensive. You can see the cost at $7,280 for 3. Most of that is the screen rental and the licensing. In 2021, we look at eliminating the overtime and moving that to a different site, as well as getting a sponsor for the entire series. Taste of Orland Park, one of our favorite events, our biggest neighborhood party, of course, is projected to increase by 3% in 2021 to $219,000. Last year, we learned a few things about the footprint out there. We intend to utilize that footprint again, tweaking it just a tad for 2021, adding an ADA gate. Overall, it'll reduce the overall staffing, which is also a difficult thing to do as a part of the taste anyway. Sponsorships in 2019, the last full year of sponsorships was a little over $402,000. This past year, we had about $159,000. Staff is committed to presenting sponsors for the Taste of Orland Park, the 4th of July, and the Centennial Park Concert Series, as well as increasing the overall number of sponsorships and partnership opportunities. So we'll be looking forward to that in 2021. We have a couple of contracts that are coming due in 2021. So the contract with our fireworks provider, Melrose Pyrotechnics, is expired. So we'll be issuing an RFP to find another pyrotechnics provider in 2021. The cost of that is expected to increase by $2,000 to $27,000. Our concessionaire contract expires this year, so we'll be going out to bid for that one. In 2019, we earned $13,000, almost $14,000 there, and that services Centennial Park, John Humphrey Complex, and the Centennial Park Aquatic Center. After 2 phases of renovation in John Humphrey Complex, we're very excited to be opening the complex in the spring of 2021. To date, we have 30 tournaments that are potentially booked for Centennial Park and John Humphrey Complex with the potential to earn $180,000 in revenue. So, of course, we're quite excited about that. Pool staff has already begun to look at 2021 and how to revamp the rookie lifeguard training process. The preseason prep that we do with our leadership team and the in-season staffing levels based on the attendance at the pool. We're hoping that'll reduce overall cost of part-time wages approximately $40,000 next year. Currently, we have 2,537 members or memberships at the Sportsplex. Right now, we're evaluating offering a no-commitment membership. We find that a lot of people prefer that non-commitment. They like the flexibility of being able to join and doing that at a modest enrollment fee. In 2021, revenues are expected to be about $1.3 million, which is a 14% decrease from pre-pandemic levels of $1.5 million. The Orland Park Health and Fitness Center has approximately 3,445 members. Due to the pandemic, 1,100 of those memberships are currently on bridge, which means those members aren't paying any kind of revenue dues. In 2021, they project their revenues to be down 17% to approximately $2.6 million. In 2021, the Orland Park Health and Fitness Center proposes reducing expenses by 10% to $2.7 million. Those reductions are going to become by reducing FTEs from 33.93 to 31. Reducing member towel usage, which will save approximately $12,000, and eliminating most of the locker room amenities, and which will save $11,000. Almost there, sorry. We also continue some work at the Stellwagen Farm in 2021, so we have $10,000 budgeted to restore the floors there. We're proposing to host up to 6 programs there at a cost of $3,000. The museum is going to build upon its success in 2021, offering more presentations at a cost of approximately $2,000. The Civic Center was hit really hard this past year as we were been unable to take large gatherings and bookings. Revenues in 2021 are expected to be down to $75,000, which is 60% of the 2019 pre-pandemic level. So as things recover, we will gain confidence in using that facility. And talking to Cindy today, actually August bookings are almost filled. So people are looking ahead. They're seeing the silver lining and the light at the end of the tunnel, and already doing bookings. So we're optimistic about that. Also in 2021, we are projecting to spend $8,000 to replace badly worn blinds that are in the rotunda, in the manager's office, and installing blackout shades in the exhibit hall. As we move forward, the Recreation and Park staff, we look forward to working closely with the Village Board, Village staff, the Recreation Advisory Board, Orland Park residents, and Orland Park athletic organizations in the development of conceptual master plan for Centennial Park West, and John Humphrey Complex, and Schuessler Park. The selected design firm is expected to host 3 neighborhood meetings. In each of the neighborhoods, conduct a statistically valid survey and present 3 concepts for each of the parks for the board's considerations. So I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Mr. Mayor?
Trustee Calangello.
Just a couple quick questions. So I didn't have the ability to go to the drive-in movie. Do residents pay for that?
Yes.
So how much was it this year? Was it a carload, I'm assuming?
$10 a carload.
Okay, and what is it? And I guess this is bridging the second question is, we used to get dashboards of all our events. I know it's been COVID, so all the numbers would be different. When you have a chance, which is probably never, I think when we had budget meetings, I felt bad for Nancy because we would grind her on every penny on every dashboard we had, which is pretty much giving you all the budget. So maybe if we can get that right whenever we get a chance, it's just something to see, because we use that for the future and the past to kind of learn and see how it goes. So I thought that might have been in your presentation, but I understand this is more of a high level thing. And then when I was going through the budget book, which we used to have a list of all the special events, of all the events that were planned. Unless I missed it, there wasn't really a list. I mean, you had to go through every line item to find it all. So, so can you just maybe list the major special events we're doing from start to finish?
Sure. I'll run through the calendar. Hopefully I don't miss any here.
Didn't we approve that already, the special events for next year?
I don't think we have yet.
Oh.
The spring ones, the winter,
Spring
and
yes.
summer, but
so
not
the winter
winter.
spring guide has the Cinderella's Ball and Easter egg hunt and that.
You can just email me or email the board. You don't have to go through them all. It's usually we have this is the whole list of this year, and then we could talk about, because remember, again, we had debates for hours about fencing, the pumpkin patch party, and stuff like that. So I'm used to a little more detail on those events.
Okay.
Thank you.
Mayor Pico.
Trustee Dodge.
Ray, so on a couple of slides back, you don't have to go back. We had talked about some of the free concerts, which are typically adult-oriented, more so than families, per se.
I would say that they're more adult-oriented, yes.
But the movies, right, are probably more family-oriented, some along the things like with the pumpkin patch, but we charge for those. So how do we, I don't know if we ever really talked about that as a policy. It's one thing to have ticketed concerts, because that's clearly on the glide path that we've envisioned for a while. There's issues with that, but when it comes to, we charge for certain events that are typically family-oriented, but we don't charge for free concerts, which are typically adult-oriented. I don't know if we ever really formally talked about that as a policy per se.
I don't believe we have.
Yeah, I guess my suggestion for the board is we probably want to look at that. I mean, these are not huge numbers, but, you know, if you're going to do free concerts that are primarily adults, why don't we take a look at how do we make it certain things that are family-oriented free for Orland residents, for example, depending on all the issues that go with that. That's question number one. Question number two, 3 neighborhood meetings in each project neighborhood, and then statistically valid survey. I'm assuming the survey is village-wide, given that Centennial and Centennial West are essentially village-wide assets as opposed to Schuschler, which is in the middle of a neighborhood.
That would be the intent, yes.
So the intention to get community-wide
Absolutely.
feedback, not just neighborhood feedback. We're going to do both. That's what I'm hearing you say?
Yes.
Thank you.
Anything else?
So, if there are no, are there any other questions?
Any other questions from the board?
Mr. Chairman?
Trustee Fenton?
This probably would beat a braid, but you don't have to get back up. One of the things that I think we have to consider, and I think maybe that's where you were going with the pumpkin patch charging this year, was the residents already pay for a lot of this stuff in their tax bill, where non-residents don't, but they're enjoying what the residents of Orland Park are paying. So I think some of the events maybe we should look at where the residents, yeah, they do come free, family, whatever it is, but the non-residents, I think, should be charged something because it's the taxpayers who are footing the bill for these events. And then possibly we could do more where the residents won't have to pay to go. Just a thought.
Okay. Any other questions?
Mayor Precom?
Trustee Dodge?
So, you know, George, one of the things that the village has been on a long march to do is, we'll just call it outsourcing. We'll use external staff consulting. I wouldn't mind if we could tote up the amount of money we're spending across the entire budget on outsourcing related initiatives or consultants. I know it's considerable and it makes sense often to reach to the outside market for expertise, but I'd like to see that number. And then, you know, broadly, it's a framework widely used, stop, start, continue. And I think you and staff have done a fine job with laying out some of the things that we're going to do and we're going to continue. For example, just picking on this one, to adapt and evolve existing policies, existing processes, the way we do business, you know, that all makes perfect sense. And obviously any organization, if it's going to stay healthy, has to continuously look for improvements. Got it, check. What's not in these documentations is what are we stopping doing? There's a number of things we're talking, you don't have to answer this now because this is going to probably take a little bit of thought, but before we vote on this, there's a number of things in here I think we're explicitly not going to be doing anymore. I'd like to make sure that enters into the debate.
Okay.
Thank you.
Any other comments? Any citizens want to speak? I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Mr. Mayor, if I could, just
Okay.
one last comment. I just want to thank staff for, you know, a lot of new department directors, a lot of new deputy department directors. They have put in an incredible amount of work for this budget. You know, it ends up looking really nice and clean here, but the sausage making process was, there was a lot of sausage making going on this time around because we were really all kind of learning. We had to recreate steps. So I just want to really thank staff for the hard work they put into this budget process.
Yeah, and I'll echo that before calling for adjournment and point out that, you know, we have, I know we're trying to improve our processes. We have some good processes in place, but I don't care what processes and staff has heard me say this before, it's all about the people that you hire, because you can have the greatest processes in the world. If you hire crappy people, you're going to get crappy output. And even if your processes are a little bit weak, good people will improve those processes. So it's all about the people. And all of you, I know, have entered in a very turbulent time over the last year. You've done a great job, so thank you very much. And I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
We're adjourned.